Welcome to F4 Talks. With me is a noted Swiss diplomat, Jean-Daniel Rouche. He is known for his knowledge, his insights, and his boldness. So who better than Jean-Daniel to make sense of a region he knows very well, some would argue like the back of his hand. He has been ambassador to Israel. He has been ambassador to Turkey. He has been all over the world. Welcome, Jean-Daniel.
Thank you very much, Atul Singh. It's a real pleasure being with you.
Thank you, sir. Jean-Daniel, let's crack on. What is going on in Syria?
I think these are what we are seeing are really strategic changes. You might say the old Sykes-Picot order in the Middle East was crumbling. Now it's really gone.
Yeah, I mean, that was my argument 10 years ago, that the old Sykes-Picot order would go. I didn't think it would go like that.
Well, maybe only the masterminds behind this impressive offensive that took place between late November and early December in 10 days, 2 weeks, would know or would have known. I'm not even sure they were expecting such a quick victory, but definitely we see changes. First strategic change, the so-called ring of fire that Iran and what they call the axis of resistance established around Israel has been broken. The land corridor connecting Iran and Hezbollah, Lebanon, is no more there. That's a major strategic change. Second major strategic change, Turkey is somewhat back in force in that region. And it will continue for a long time, I believe, to influence what is considered as a vital background operation for them. Third major strategic change, the superpowers, Russia and the United States in that case, seem to be on an expectation mode. They are not sure what to do, and they are not sure this is so strategic and essential for them. Fourth potential major strategic change, this could connect also economically, also in terms of energy, connect back, I might say, Turkey with what used to be its zone of influence in the Arab states, in the Gulf, with its oil. You know that a pipeline or gasoduct has been in the plans from the Gulf, from Qatar, through Turkey to Europe for a very long time. And now it seems that one of the major stumbling blocks in the realization of this project, which is important for Turkey, but even more so for Europe maybe, is becoming realistic again. So for all these reasons, I would say what has happened will have profound implications for the future, not just of the Middle East, but also of the wider region of West Asia, with also consequences which may be positive, by the way, for Europe. And I have not even mentioned the issue of the refugees, which is very present in the mind of most European governments, but also of the Turkish government.
Yeah. So very quickly, to give our listeners, those of who don't follow the region, an idea of what is going on, Bashar al-Assad, he has fled to Moscow. The regime his father set up, the Ba'athist socialist regime, which came to power in 1970 after a coup, after a military coup, is now gone. 54 years of Alawite rule, the Shia minority. They are from the mountains near the Mediterranean, or on the next to the Mediterranean, and they were persecuted, going as far back as 1520 under Selim I, the Ottoman ruler. But they had a field day for the last 54 years, but the Alawites are no longer going to be in charge. The Sunnis are back in charge. A certain Abu Muhammad al-Julani, his real name is Ahmad al-Shara. He's the emir of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. He was running an enclave in Idlib, and he had a lightning offensive to Damascus. That is what Jean Daniel referred to. In 10 days, Jolani's troops reached Damascus. And of course, soon the chief of MIT, Turkey's intelligence agency, followed suit, and they were praying together in the Umayyad Mosque all across the Sunni world, all the way till Bangladesh. Surprisingly, for many of our listeners, in Pakistan, in India, and in Bangladesh, Sunnis have celebrated, not all, some have celebrated the return of the Umayyad Mosque from Shia to Sunni hands. So a lot is going on, and Jean Daniel has just painted us a picture of the key strategic implications of this quick and spectacular victory of Ahmad al-Shara. So, Jean Daniel, a lot of people don't know much about Syria. They could possibly put it on the map, but it's an interesting country. It's a product of Sykes-Picot. Lebanon and Syria went to France. Israel, then Palestine, Jordan, Iraq went to the UK. They were all protectorates or mandates. And since then, of course, things have changed dramatically in many ways. We've had the Cold War. We've had the end of the Cold War. We have had wars in the Middle East, 2003. We've had the Arab uprisings. We've had the Syrian civil war. So paint us a picture of this tumultuous land, and at the moment, who are the key players, both internal and external?
Well, there seems to be a kind of curse on this region, and I mean mostly Syria, but also Lebanon, which were the two French protectorates, while the rest of the Arab part of the former Ottoman Empire were under British rule and then influence, and then American influence. And the curse is that they seem to be always in need of outside influence to have to establish some kind of order and stability there. So nowadays, I mean, one month ago, you could have said that the key players in Syria were mostly Iran, a little bit Israel, because they've been occupying part of Syria, the Golan Heights, since 1980. The United States, who maintain somewhere around 2,000 troops in the northeastern part of Turkey, but that the Arab world itself...
Northeastern part of Syria, sorry, not Turkey.
Sorry, northeastern part of Syria.
Yeah.
But that the
Arab Kurdish
world...
areas. The Kurdish areas, correct?
The Kurdish area northeast of Syria, which is under control of the so-called YPJ, which is, in the view of Turkey,
terrorist
under the control of the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, which is a Kurdish rebellion, a Turkish Kurdish rebellion, wishing to establish at least an autonomy and maybe an independent state on the eastern part of Turkey, as had been promised to the Kurds after the Sykes-Picot agreement we're talking about in the peace negotiations that took place after the First World War. You say you need a long memory to understand all the components of this region, because it all dates back, I think, the key moment, which in a way can be compared to today, because it was a major strategic change, was the First World War and the dismantlement of the Ottoman Empire after the First World War in the Trianon Agreement that was then revised in Lausanne in 1923. So you have to go back 100 years to really see the major forces who continue to have an interest in that region.
Our viewers should note that Lausanne is in Switzerland, so the Swiss have some experience there.
Maybe that's why I know so much about that, because in 2023, I was a Swiss ambassador to Turkey.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to see how modestly the Turkish government celebrated the 100 years of the modern state of Turkey, actually, that was established in Lausanne. There were very, very, very few celebrations. And I think it shows that in the mind of the current leaders, Lausanne, which established the current borders of Turkey, Lausanne was more a defeat than a victory.
Yeah.
And that tells a lot about this triumvirate, you might say, of Turkish leaders: President Erdogan, the person you have mentioned, the head of the MIT, Ibrahim Kalin, and his predecessor in the MIT, who is now the foreign minister, Hakan Fidan.
Yeah.
Because their inspiration, the roots of their action, is very much in the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. They tend to consider what used to be the regions forming the Ottoman Empire as a natural sphere of interest and therefore possibly of influence of the Turkey of today. They feel pretty strong. They have established a rather successful and strong military industry, for instance. They invest a lot. They have also an economic outreach, especially with regard to the building of infrastructure, not so much unlike the way China is projecting its power, by the way. So those three people, they really share this understanding of where today's Turkey comes from, where are its natural interests, in historical interests, but also they are three people who are moved by a very deep religious convictions. You can say that. They all belong to, Islam, including Sunni Islam you refer to, is not at all a monolithic bloc. There are many, many different movements within the Sunni family or Ummah. And one of them are the Sufi brotherhoods. But also the Sufi brotherhoods are divided only in Turkey in at least a dozen different currents. And all three of them are active believers in one of these currents. So they have this strong spiritual or religious drive, which is also animating them, in addition to their understanding of the Ottoman legacy of Turkey. You know,
may I very quickly tell our viewers one thing, which of course you know, but many don't, is that the Ottoman leader, or the Osmaniye Sultan, was also the Khalifa, the Caliph for the Sunni world till the end of World War I, and was Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who created a new secular Europeanized state and turned his back on the caliphate. This is something that some Sunnis regret very much. Remember that in 1919, Sunnis in India launched the Khilafat movement to bring the Khalifa back in Turkey, which was incongruous. But it's important to note that the new Ottomans never bought into the Ataturk state. And the tension between the Turkish Ataturk state and the new Ottomans who are in charge still persists.
Yeah, yes. On the other hand, the Turkish government, AKP, which has been in power now for more than 20 years, recognizes the Ataturk legacy. Because we should not forget that this Trianon Treaty, which was not only dismantling the Ottoman Empire, but also which was dividing current Turkey into British, French, Italian, even Greek spheres of influence, which was giving a large Kurdish and a large Armenian state in the eastern part of what is today Turkey, this Trianon Treaty was signed by the Caliph of that time, by the Sultan actually. And Atatürk resisted against the occupation by foreign forces of core Turkey and resisted militarily, and through the force of arms re-established the sovereignty of Turkey, at least over what is now Turkey, plus a small addition, which is Iskenderun and Antakya, historical Antioch, that was given to Turkey by the French in 1939 to buy their neutrality during World War II, actually. So it's they have this kind of ambiguous, ambivalent, I would say, relationship with the legacy of Atatürk. On the one hand, they respect him for what he has been doing, refusing the diktat of the great powers after the First World War. But now they want to go one step further and reestablish, I wouldn't say their sovereignty. I don't think they are in an annexionist mood towards Syria or any part of the former Ottoman Empire, but certainly to establish their influence and to play again the role of regional power that they have had until the First World War. I think that's the key issue. Now, one thing which should be really underlined, I'm not sure the Arabs like that so much. There has been for a very long time a fierce competition for the primacy within the Sunni world between mostly Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. And they all have somewhat some sort of legitimacy to pretend to the primacy in the Sunni world. The Saudis, obviously, because they control the two most holy places, Mecca and Medina. Turkey because of their Ottoman legacy, but Egypt because Cairo has been traditionally the center of the spiritual authority, with the rector of the Mosque of Al-Azhar, who has been traditionally one of the most listened, authoritative voice in the Sunni world. If I may, a small anecdote. When Egypt, when there was the revolution in Egypt during the so-called Arab Spring and Muslim Brothers came to power, once I was invited to a meeting in Istanbul where you had representatives of the Muslim Brothers from all over the world, and they were really in an jubilant mood because the Muslim Brothers were winning everywhere in those days. And the then foreign minister of Turkey, Ahmet Davutoglu, made a speech, jubilant speech, where he said, after 80 years, we, the Turks, were back. And I was sitting at a table with Egyptian women who were probably members of the female branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, they call that sisterhood in Egypt. And those women who are extremely smart, they spoke wonderful English. And they looked at me with a lot of skepticism in their eyes. And they told me, what is this guy talking about? We don't want the Turks back. So, of course, you can say now that that Al-Julani and with him, his Turkish sponsors have won an important battle. But what will be very important to see in the future is how they manage to share power or to create connections with the Emiratis, the Qataris, and most importantly with Egypt and Saudi Arabia to work towards a truly inclusive reconstruction and governance system in Syria, because the potential for a civil war or for more disruptions is very much present.
And in a way, the civil war hasn't ended yet. Only recently, Alawites, former Alawite army officers have ambushed the new powers in Damascus. So, what I hear, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we will see we will see Lebanon divided into spheres of influence. The Druze are going to seek, are actually already seeking shelter from the Israelis. Israel has annexed the rest of the Golan Heights. The Kurds certainly don't want to live under HTS. The Alawites will probably appeal to their Russian patrons in Latakia and Tartus for protection, and they will have their own enclave. In fact, historically, that's where they've had their enclave. So, on the whole, the entity called Syria, which French governed through a centralized bureaucracy in Damascus, in the light of their historical experience of a centralized nation state, I think that is not coming back. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men will not be able to put the Humpty Dumpty of Sykes-Picot back again.
Yeah. No, but I think the point is certainly not to go back to a Sykes-Picot type of a governance system. And by the way, there is one more group, which is in my view also very important. And these are the Arab tribes, which are sort of center-east, south of the Kurdish area. And many of them are fighting under the ISIS-Daesh banner. And those people are also extremely important for stability in that region, because they can be a very disruptive power, as we have seen in other cases. So the challenge of the new authorities and of their Turkish patrons will be to associate all these groups in and to do a power sharing agreement with the Kurds, with the Arab tribes, with the Alawites. And well, the Druze, you know, usually the Druze, they side with the stronger side. So if Al-Jolani and company prove that they can give them what they need and allow them to live in a positive way, in a profitable way, they will sign with them. That's what the Druze have been. That has been the survival tactics of the Druze ever since. But to achieve this kind of new balance, inclusive balance, which Al-Jolani has said he wants to achieve, I think there will need to be also some agreement with the outside powers. And the key outside powers in that case will be the Saudi Arabia, Egypt, well, Israel. Some sort of modus vivendi will have to be found with Israel. And then I think that we'll have also to find a way to associate Iran and Turkey, or Iran and Russia in the new system. Two things there. One, what is remarkable is that I think it was just after the beginning of the offensive, there was a meeting in Qatar between Hakan Fidan and the Russian and Iranian foreign ministers. I really wonder what they've been talking about, because it was already clear at that moment that Iran and Russia were on the losing side. So what kind of guarantees have been given to Russia, by Hakan Fidan, I don't know. But of course, what the Russians would like is to keep their two significant bases near Tartus and Latakia on the Mediterranean coast. This is the real strategic asset for Russia. The second guarantee may be that Hakan Fidan should have given to the Russians and the Iranians is not to disrupt the institutions, not the way that the Americans have been doing in Iraq, you know, by destroying the institutions and trying to build new ones. So the plan is not to create chaos. And you have seen they have kept the institutions. And I think this is what the Russians have been saying since the beginning of the civil war in Syria. We're not against a transition, but it should be an orderly transition within the framework of the current institutions. And for the time being, they seem to say and do almost all the right things. There is a roadmap. People maybe don't remember, but in 2012, when the civil war was not yet in full swing, a meeting took place under the UN leadership in Geneva. Kofi Annan was the UN mediator in those days. And in that meeting, the P5, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus all the neighboring countries having a stake in Syria, were represented. And they agreed on the so-called Geneva Communique, which remains to this day the roadmap to a transition, to an orderly transition in Syria. And this Geneva Communique was then translated into a Security Council resolution a time later. So there is a roadmap. I do believe that what Al-Julani and the new leadership are trying to do is to say, we're going to stick to the spirit, at least, of the roadmap by being inclusive, by bringing all political forces into a new government system. Whether they will succeed, I don't know. It will depend a lot on the way they manage to handle the Kurds, on the way the Turks are managing the Kurds, but also on their ability to connect, to reach out to their powerful neighbors, starting with the Arab world.
So if I may very quickly ask, Iraq is next door to Syria. And back in the day of the Ba'athist party domination of both Iraq and Iraq and Syria, both Hafiz al-Assad and Saddam Hussein were Ba'athists, but they never got along. One was Shia, one was Sunni. They were both minorities in their own country. And of course, Islamic State arose partly because of the American invasion of Iraq. They left such a vacuum, and then the tribes gathered, and then, of course, they moved to Raqqa. So Iraq probably has a role as well. Jordan probably has some role. And one hears of UAE and Qatar. In particular, one hears rumors that the deal to oust Assad was probably made in Qatar, in Doha, when all the foreign ministers met. So tell us about these players as well, sir.
Well, UAE, Qatar, they are important players because they have a lot of financial assets, and therefore they can choose a little bit, they can choose where they are going to direct their money and their financial support. But I continue to believe that the key player behind them is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has ambitions. We have seen over the past year that they have started to have a much more autonomous foreign policy. Now, Syria being in their immediate sort of neighborhood, even though they don't have a border, for them it is of strategic importance. Also because of the importance of Damascus in the history of Islam. Yeah. So for me, these are really the key player is Saudi Arabia, but the Emirates and Qatar, they are much quicker to react and to be active in that region. Regarding Iraq,
Qatar and Saudi Arabia have their own rivalry going on. Qatar has Al Jazeera, Qatar, but you know, relations both with Iran and Turkey.
The relationship between Qatar, the Emirates, and Saudi Arabia is really like it's almost like a family, if you want, like family relationship. From the point of view of Saudi Arabia, they all belong to the same family, and MBS is the elder brother, and those two guys there, the MBZ and the Al Thani family, they are sort of cousins, which are not really always very respectful of the primacy of the elder brothers. So I know they don't have, it's not an easy relationship, but from the point of view of Saudi Arabia, they are definitely the primus inter pares, or they are really the most important force.
Yeah.
One word about Iraq. I'm not sure Iraq can play really in the same league as the 3 other countries we have mentioned, but they can do something very important, which we have seen them doing increasingly over the past years, and it is to try to be the mediating power between opposing forces in the region. You remember that in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, there was a normalization agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia signed in Beijing. What has not been reported a lot is that most of the work was done by the Iraqis. And then they offered this as a success to China, but Iraq played a leading role in trying to bring together the parties. And the current Iraqi leadership, first, it has a very deep interest into that because they are divided between Sunnis and Shias also. But on top, of that,
Kurds.
But they have proven their ability to bring the opposing forces together. So I think Iraq bears some hopes to help foster stability between those various regional powers.
So we've talked about the key players. We've also touched upon their interests. You said you were surprised by how Bashar al-Assad fell so spectacularly. Why did Abu Muhammad al-Jalani of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham achieve such spectacular success? Why him? Why not many of the other rebel groups? And why so quickly?
Well, because HTS was groomed during at least 4 years.
By MIT.
6 years. Mostly by Turkey.
So by MIT,
let's not forget they were cornered in the northwest of Syria with only one supply line, because they were surrounded by forces which were government forces or faithful to the government, and the only supply route was through Turkey. So if they managed to revitalize, regenerate such a formidable, effective force, which entails roughly 30,000 troops, I'm told, it's because they received the Turkish and maybe other types of Western, we don't know yet, maybe we'll know one day, types of support. But definitely Turkey, this triumvirate in Turkey truly has a strategic vision of what their interests are, and also the ability to put the resources where their objectives are. So I think that's definitely the key to success. But we should not underestimate one factor. Turkey was very much active in Idlib. They also had a military presence there since 2018, roughly. But there is another group, which is not HTS, that has been supported by Turkey, which is called the Syrian National Army.
Exactly, I was going to ask you about.
It's almost an arm of the Turkish army.
Yeah.
And they also launched an offensive at the same time as HTS was pushing towards Aleppo and then Damascus. The Syrian National Army was pushing along the Turkish-Syrian border towards the Euphrates to first take over the pockets which were still under the control of the Kurdish forces at that point, and then to put pressure on the mainland or the main stronghold of the Kurdish forces east of the Euphrates, which is where also Americans have their bases and are supporting the Kurdish forces. So the major, in my view, unresolved issue for the future of stability in Syria is what is going to happen between Turkey and its proxy, the Syrian National Army, and the Kurdish forces supported by the Americans. And by the way, if, depending how it goes, we could also see a resurgence of some Kurdish forces supported by Iran, because the relationship between Turkey and Iran may develop one way or another. But let's not forget that the strategic security aim of this operation is also on the side of Turkey to create a buffer zone of 30 kilometers free of Kurdish combatants inside Syria and all along the Turkish border, the Turkish-Syrian border from west to east. They have not yet achieved that aim. Their goal is now to achieve that aim through negotiations with the support of the Americans, and probably they hope that Trump will be helpful.
I see. Now, there is talk that Assad's troops were not getting paid. Assad did not listen to his Russian and Iranian allies who warned him. He was out of touch. And there was a lot of money that Jolani had. And it was money that probably came from Qatar and UAE and perhaps even Saudi Arabia. And maybe even the West, as you alluded, maybe even the US, the weapons and the training, maybe American. And this is what enabled Jolani to achieve such spectacular success against an Alawite-led Syrian army that fundamentally had lost morale.
Yeah, no, not only lost morale, but or maybe the reason why they lost morale is also that they were not paid, or they were paid such minimal amounts of money that they had no interest to fight for this family that had lost any sort of moral or legitimacy. I think that's the key word, is legitimacy.
Lost legitimacy.
I mean, what I can say from what I have seen when I was in Ankara is that at least there was some Western involvement in rebranding al-Julani from a terrorist. Let's not forget, I think he's still on terrorist lists from the West and from the UN.
I think they've taken the bounty off him. They had a 10 million bounty on his,
yes, but
on
he
his
had
head.
a bounty of 10 million, an American
Yes.
bounty of 10 million.
Exactly.
On him. But there were quite a few people who used to travel through Turkey to Idlib to meet him and help him to rebrand from a terrorist cutting heads to a kind of modern Che Guevara without the cigar.
And he looks a bit like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, with the big beard.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So they have been very, very successful, I think, in the West in changing his image into a kind of romantic freedom fighter, which is saying the right things. You know, he wants an inclusive government, etc., etc.
And he's in a suit and a tie. He's no longer in the Arab dress.
Yes, yeah, that was part of the rebranding, and he cut also his beard, but also his language has become a language which is pleasing the ears of the Western leaders. Now, this did not happen, you know, on by its own. There were people who went there, who tried to influence him, and with success actually, rebranding him. But is this only cosmetics, or does he really mean it?
I mean, how do you control your own fighters who believe in jihad? Already his troops have been asking women to wear veils. In Idlib, you get posters. A woman without a veil or without a niqab is like a city without walls. There are no minorities really in Idlib. So it'll be a very different proposition for him. Even let's assume he has a change of heart. He becomes this Sufi tolerant figure. But it'll be really difficult for his troops on the ground to suddenly make that switch.
Yeah, I think this is the key question, whether it's cosmetic or whether it's serious, because it's not only him saying the right things, but it's also all his government, because for the time being, there is no inclusivity in the government. There is one woman who is in charge of women affairs.
Yeah. She's Turkish, Syrian.
But how are the 30,000 troops and the whole apparatus? I mean, do they believe in these ideas of inclusivity and being tolerant towards the religious minorities? You've mentioned the Alawites, you've mentioned the Druze, but let's not forget the Christians.
Oh yes, of course.
Syria, we are not sure about
and they've been in the news in the news recently for it. You know, already they are suffering.
At least they are worried. And according to the most recent statistics, they say that 5 to 10% of the population of Syria are Christians. Why it's important? It's important because traditionally, in the whole region, by the way, also in Palestine, the Christians, they were sort of controlling the bazaar. They were very active economically. They were the kind what we call the bourgeoisie. And
Hanan Ashrafi was Palestinian Christian. Edward Said was Palestinian Christian.
Oh, many of the PLO leaders
so was the
Palestinian
Iraqi
Christians.
foreign minister. So the Christians were the bourgeoisie. They controlled the bazaar. They were the intellectuals. They was the authors. They were the ones often who put the Arab voice intellectually on the Western stage.
Yes, no, that's absolutely true, and this was true also in Lebanon, and this was true under Assad in Syria. That's why the Christian bourgeoisie was sort of supporting Assad because and Assad was sort of needing them also. Now this Christian type of economic elite is looking at the current circumstances with a lot of questions and fear also for the future.
So do we then expect a Taliban-like regime? And if so, a continuation of civil war?
I don't think that's in the interest of of those who have a lot of influence on HTS. I mean, if Ibrahim Kalin exhibits himself like that with Al-Julani in the Umayyad Mosque, which is, by the way, one of the most beautiful buildings on earth. I hope everything stabilizes and we can all go back to Damascus and enjoy the beauties of this amazing country. So if he shows himself bragging with, almost bragging, let's say, with Al-Julani, it is certainly because he's confident that they will be able to steer the process in a way that fits their interests, and they're certainly not in the interests of Turkey to create chaos and so on. I think the Turks will certainly advise Al-Julani and his crowd to show mercy and to show tolerance towards the various minorities. It may be easier with the Christian minority as it will be with the Alawi community, because as you said, first they are more numerous, and especially they are concentrated in along the coast, but also in the mountainous areas, which are more difficult to control. We have seen also that let's say those parts of the Assad regime that were still military able, they have immediately withdrawn there, and I hear that there have been already some clashes with the HTS forces. So the remnants of the regime will probably try to create some strongholds there, and there is a potential for at least a localized conflicts in that part of Syria.
Yeah, so
and then, of course, I mean, what Assad and his regime have been doing, mostly to the Sunnis, but not only to all opponents, the crimes, the horrors we have seen in the prisons, this is not fake, this is not propaganda. I mean, this has been the repression after the revolts of 2011. They have been absolutely extremely brutal, and you can imagine the number of.
Yeah, Jean-Daniel, to be fair, or not to be fair, to be precise, that's the correct word. It goes back to 1982 when Muslim Brotherhood rebelled. And at that time, it was Hafez al-Assad who was president, and Bashar's uncle Rafat meted that extreme injustice
Well,
in
I think
Homs.
they bombed with artillery the city of Homs, killing like 30,000 people.
So this is not just 2011, it goes back much longer.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. I think that the number of victims of Assad since 2011 is less concentrated geographically and more widespread through all streams of the society.
Yeah.
So the desire for justice or for revenge on the side of the victims and the families of the victims of this horrible brutality will be very, very, very difficult to manage, because the forces to seek retribution against the Alawites will be very, very powerful. So that's why it's important that Al-Julani offers a way to justice and compensation to those families and the victims.
That's a really thin needle or tiny needle to thread, because given the nature of the Middle East, given the different memories, Alawites, of course, they feel dispossessed and they will perhaps not exactly be in the most bargaining of modes.
No,
I think
I know, but what is important, and there the West can be really helpful, is that we do our utmost to catch some of the leaders, some of the key players who were around Assad. I think Assad is out of reach. But if some sort of tribunal could be set up, or if the International Criminal Court could be tasked with trying some of the key players of the Assad regime responsible for these horrible crimes, I think that would already be something that would help alleviate the sufferings and the desire for revenge of many of those affected families.
now there's one more thing that a lot of people are saying, that yes, Jolani is in charge, and MIT thinks, the Turks think they can control him, but there will inevitably at some point be Arab-Turkish tension. You've already alluded to it when you were sitting at that dinner in Istanbul. The Turks have imperial memory. The Turks do have this feeling that they are the most organized power in the Muslim world. They are the most advanced militarily and in terms of diplomacy and intelligence. But the Arabs are no longer living in the 19th century. They are no longer living as let's say, subjects under the Khalifa in Arab colonies, loosely, admittedly, governed by Turkish governors. So the Arab nationalism genie was uncorked in the 1940s, 50s, in the wave of decolonization. And lest we forget, Jolani comes from the Golan Heights. He was born in Saudi Arabia, and his father was an Arabist, apparently. So we hear, a socialist. One of his relatives served Assad. So nationalism, once let's say, even Jolani, he becomes more powerful, nationalism is bound to recur. It's going to be tricky, even for the Turks, to control Jolani.
Well, we cannot so much predict into the future, as we have said, both of us. I think that the situation is loaded with a lot of uncertainties. What I would do, well, what I would suggest is that somebody, it could be the UN, or it could be the Iraqi government, or another one, would be to call for a meeting of all the major powers, the regional powers, who have a say in Turkish affairs, maybe in Baghdad, and bring the Saudis and the Turks and the Qataris, the Emiratis, together around the table with Al-Julani, and refresh the roadmap that had been adopted in Geneva and then in the Security Council resolution, to have an agreement of those outside powers, because each outside power separately has the power to disrupt any effort.
Understood.
But if they work together they have really the power to bring Syria on the way to reconstruction.
Good. So individually, they can all throw a spoke in the wheels, but the wheels will only move if they act together.
Yes, I think because each one of them can really create huge problems, and then there are two outside actors, which would probably be difficult to bring into such a process, and it's Israel and Iran, who also have lots of resources and means to disrupt the process. And those two would have to be dealt with, I guess, separately. But the first step would be at least to have some Turkish Arab, I've forgotten Egypt, which would be there also, a Turkish Arab understanding on the way forward. And then there are channels to try to bring Iran and Israel on board also, at least to find a way to buy their benevolence or their readiness not to disrupt the process. Some people say Israel has an interest to create chaos, and they don't have an interest to see a unified Syria that could be one day, again, a big security challenge. Well, I think they should be reassured, and the only ones who can reassure them are the Americans, I guess.
Understood. Well, the Israelis have already destroyed all of the Israeli Air Force. This is the first time in history that a country has managed to take out all of the Air Force, sunk most of the Navy, and taken out all military assets in Syria. So it's a pretty impressive military operation that they've carried out.
Yes, although I think the Israeli did the same in 1967 when they took out all of the Egyptian Air Force, of which Nasser was so proud. And that explains the defeat of the Arab and Egyptian forces in the six days war. So it's not really the first time. I think the Israelis are very pragmatic people. They really saw the opportunity to destroy the military might or the main military assets of Syria, so that they don't fall into the hands of the jihadists. That shows also how limited the trust they have in the Turks, huh? And in those jihadists. And they took advantage of the situation. Now, this being said, frankly, you cannot really say that the air force of Bashar al-Assad was something remotely spectacular or effective or strong enough to pose any sort of threat to Israel.
On this, this is a question which the Israelis worry about, is that in the long term, the biggest threat to them is a charismatic Sunni leader who turns anti-Israeli, because the Shias are still 10% roughly of the population. They are a threat, but not as big a threat as a populist Sunni leader. We saw that with Egypt. Gamal Abdel Nasser was such a huge threat to Israel. And the developments in Syria, with now the Sunnis back in charge, with the Umayyad mosque back in the hands of the Sunnis, probably in the long term, has increased the threat to Israel, because an embattled Alawite regime was not in a condition to threaten Israel at all, as you point out.
Yeah, but we should not forget that in the Trump 1 administration, the Israelis have scored a number of successes in establishing profitable relations with a number of Sunni states.
UAE,
Morocco, which is also, by the way, which also has a strong legitimacy because of the king in the Sunni world. They have had the peace agreement since the 90s with Egypt and Jordan. So really, the first missing link is Saudi Arabia. And we know that before October 7th, actually, maybe it's even a reason for October 7th, that the normalization talks between Riyadh and Israel were advancing pretty well. So I think the strategy of Israel will be to try to push towards normalization with Saudi Arabia with the help of Donald Trump very soon, to cover themselves there. And then basically you have only Syria, which will remain a weak, divided society for a while under the influence of its powerful neighbors. And then Iraq, which is also still largely a work in progress, work in
A weak
reconstruction.
divided society as well.
Yes, yes. So I think that they can look into the medium term with confidence that the Sunni world will not unite behind a leader and threaten Israel. The key is really in Riyadh. And there the question is whether Riyadh, MBS, will stay behind the long-standing demand of the kingdom, which is we are ready to normalize with Israel, provided you give a state or you stop the occupation and you give a state to the Palestinians in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and on the Gaza Strip. Now, this would be totally unacceptable for Israel today. Unfortunately, sadly so, because I believe that that would be the key to long-term peace in that region. But these settlers have taken way too much influence now on the Israeli government so that they can accept a deal, and they hope they can both have the normalization with Saudi Arabia and continue with the settlement enterprise in the West Bank and now even in the north of Gaza, and not have to give the holy sites in East Jerusalem back.
And Golan, Netanyahu has said there'll be settlers on Golan.
Yes, and probably they will start to move even further into Syria. That's their vision. Their vision of the Zionist state does not stop at the Jordan River. It goes further north and east.
So we are speaking soon after the death of Jimmy Carter. And his greatest achievement, arguably, was the peace deal between Israel and Egypt. Sadat and Anwar al-Sadat and Menachem Begin. We are also speaking on a day when the BBC is carrying stories about babies freezing to death. How do you think that plays out in the Sunni world? How do you think that plays out all the way from Istanbul to Riyadh?
Well, the Israelis believe two things. The first one is that they will never, in the foreseeable future, be accepted by the populations of the Arab world. There has been too much hatred cultivated within the people of the region. On the other hand, they strongly believe that the rulers of the Arab states and in most of the Muslim world, which are not democratically elected, will find one day an interest through a mix of interest and pressure by the Americans to normalize their relations with Israel. And that will, like that, they will buy stability for a while. But they know that over the very long term, their position will have to be renegotiated, or they will have to show force from time to time. Their position is not secured for 1,000 years. Let's put it this way. But for the time being, because of the display of force they have shown, because Trump is coming back to the White House, I think they feel in a relatively comfortable position, most of them. And don't forget, those who make the policies and those who decide on the use of military force, these are not the populations which are like all of us in Europe and which are shocked by what we see happening in Gaza. But those who make the policies are the rulers, and the rulers are not accountable to their people in that part of the world, unfortunately.
So there are chances for peace, and I'm sure.
Yeah, but can that be can it be a long-standing peace without without granting the Palestinians their right to self-determination? I really doubt it. because this sort of hatred against Israel will continue to be nurtured, to be cultivated by some forces. It may explode again. There may be an October 7th magnitude 10 in 10 years or 20 years if this matter is not being solved.
I see. Well, I'm sure you'll be keeping an eye on everything. That's what I was going to say, and we'll have you back, Jean-Daniel.
Always a pleasure, Atul. Pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.